After 2+ years of waiting since the release of the initial teaser trailer, we have finally got our first real look at Square Enix's Avengers project at E3 2019. Now simply titled Marvel's Avengers, the game will be coming to PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Stadia on May 15th, 2020. Not only did we get an in-engine trailer of the game, but details regarding the gameplay itself, its story, and its post-launch content rollout were also revealed during E3. Overall, I was pretty happy with what they showed and excited to see more of the game. But as I listened to podcasts, watched videos, and read feedback all over the internet, it quickly became clear that I was in the minority. It seemed that everywhere I looked, there was a ton of hatred directed towards the game, negativity around how Square Enix handled their reveal, and probably worst of all, those faces. We need to talk about those faces. People ain't digging the faces. So in today's video, I'm going to give my perspective on this whole E3 2019 Avengers debacle. I'll give my thoughts on what exactly I think they did wrong, what pissed everyone off so much, and why in reality it's not that bad. I truly believe most of the negative conversations surrounding the game right now can be course corrected and fixed between now and launch day. Whoa, hold up. I'm not saying you have to agree with me, I just think it's way too early to completely write off this game, especially since it has so much potential and comes smack dab in the middle of this golden age of Marvel Comics. Maybe by the end of this video, you too will realize it's not that bad, and certainly nothing that can't be fixed, and maybe you too will be as hype as I am for this game. Anyways, let's not waste any more time and get right into it. No matter who you are, I think expectations for this Avengers game were sky high going into E3 2019. As an Avengers project, it had to follow Avengers Endgame, now officially the biggest movie of all time. As a Marvel video game, it had to follow Spider-Man on PS4, which was not only a critical darling, but a massive commercial success, outselling Batman Arkham City to become the best-selling superhero game of all time, with well over 9 million copies sold in less than a year.
This doesn't look as good as Spider-Man, which feels like should be the bar, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's the Avengers game.
If that pressure wasn't enough, perhaps working against this reveal the most was the fact that it wasn't really a reveal. This game was already officially announced, with a teaser trailer released in January of 2017. This is kinda a problem Square Enix has had forever. They announce things way too early. The result is usually a big title just kinda sitting there with no update provided for months, and in many cases for years. All the while, fans are aware this game exists and creating in their head their own perfect game. Expectations are increasing for those 2 years, and hype gets out of control. So when you finally decide it's time to re-debut a game initially revealed years ago, you better have something special to show everyone who's been patiently waiting. It's funny because Square's very own Final Fantasy VII Remake had a very similar rollout, being announced to a standing ovation all the way back at E3 2015. Since then, years have passed and barely any new footage of the game was released. But at E3 2019, boy did they blow the roof off the place with that fan service-filled, hype-inducing trailer. Instead, for Avengers, we got this. A trailer almost entirely consisting of cutscenes and footage from the opening moments of the game. The introduction level. The 5 core Avengers from the 2012 movie fighting in San Francisco, aka generic American City, the most visually bland location they could have possibly gone with. Again, most of the general public just saw the Avengers do stuff like this and this. So I don't think it's very surprising that the Avengers fighting on a bridge against random human bad guys with guns isn't generating a ton of excitement. Only about 10 seconds of footage at the very end of the trailer teased what was to come beyond that introductory bridge level. However, it was cut together so rapidly that it was hard to even absorb what was happening. We got a really cool shot of Thor using his powers to keep a helicarrier from crashing into the city below. It takes place at night, which alone made it far more visually interesting than the bridge footage from before. Iron Man can also be seen at night, and we even get a great callback to this iconic scene from Iron Man 1. Next, we get a half-second glimpse of Black Widow fighting what appears to be an Adaptoid. You know, Adaptoids are pretty freaking badass and look really cool. Maybe the trailer would have been a bit more exciting if we saw the Avengers fighting with them instead of generic grunts with guns. Next, Hulk grapples with Abomination, which tells me we could be seeing tons of the Avengers Rogues Gallery in this game. I'm a broken record at this point, but why not show more of Abomination? Where's Loki, Hela, Ultron? The list goes on and on. The trailer ends with this quick shot of Iron Man in space wearing a white suit. The suit resembles the Mark 39 Starboost suit that was seen briefly in Iron Man 3. I figure this shot is teasing the fact that the Avengers will travel to space at some point in the game, and at the very least, Iron Man will be donning different suits throughout the story depending on the task at hand. Those final 10 seconds of trailer footage was a really good indication, I think, of what we could expect from the entire game as a whole, but boy did they do a good job not emphasizing any of it. I've barely heard any talk about this later game stuff because so much emphasis was placed on that early bridge sequence. What came next from the presentation was perhaps even more baffling. Instead of getting into some of the more nitty-gritty details regarding the game, maybe with some, I don't know, uninterrupted raw gameplay footage, instead we got this bizarre 2-minute featurette featuring the game's voice cast giving their thoughts on the characters. I feel like this would have worked better as a random upload to Square's YouTube channel and not as a part of the much anticipated grand reveal of this big upcoming title. This was another part of the presentation that seemed to just leave people confused. To end things, more members of the Crystal Dynamics team came out on stage to explain some of the plans for the game's co-op multiplayer, character customization, and post-launch content rollout, including the very good news that all post-launch content will be free for all players. That's cool, but where was the gameplay to go along with this? What does the co-op multiplayer look like? Why are we even talking about post-launch content 11 months before launch? We've barely even seen the base game, and you're talking about post-launch stuff? Notice how I'm asking all these questions? I shouldn't be asking this many questions. The press conference ended with another 5-second clip from the game, a cutscene featuring Hank Pym, basically confirming that Ant-Man will be a part of the game. And that was it. Given the expectations and literally years of hype for this title, Square needed to hit this Avengers reveal out of the park. With the game less than a year away, I think audiences expected far more actual gameplay than what we got. A playable demo available for attendees of the show seemed totally realistic given the timeline. If we weren't going to get a demo, I'd expect at least a trailer or dev breakdown that took a really deep dive into the game's core mechanics. How exactly are they going to translate characters like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor into a AAA gaming world like Spider-Man before them? They mentioned customization options at the presentation. Could you give us an example or two? How about some alternate costumes? Ant-Man being revealed was a decent little stinger at the end, but is that really the most exciting Avenger you could show us to build interest? At San Diego Comic-Con a month later, Ms. Marvel was finally revealed to be a part of the game. I think she would have left a much bigger impression as a part of the E3 presentation, and stood out much more to the average viewer considering she is not yet part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's clear that Square treated this like a reveal, like it was the first time the world was hearing that Square Enix would be making an Avengers game. If that was the case, a heavily cinematic presentation like this, that focused on the opening moments of the game, probably would have been satisfactory. Plenty of games are first revealed to the world through CG trailers or in-game cutscenes stitched together. Just seeing the game in any form would have been super hype. But obviously that's not the actual case here. Out of the entire 15-minute presentation, we got mere seconds of actual gameplay footage interspersed between minutes of, quite frankly, unexciting cutscenes. In the end, the E3 presentation from Square left more questions than answers, which seemed impossible in the weeks leading into the show. To make things worse, Square actually decided to show off more of the game and its gameplay behind closed doors. They went full Cyberpunk 2077 and only showed raw gameplay footage to the press, never to be released officially to the public. The big difference is that Cyberpunk's behind closed doors gameplay demo at E3 last year was presented nearly 2 years before its current scheduled release date. Even then, the 45 minutes of footage was released to the public later that year for all to see. We are a lot closer to launch here at E3 2019 with Avengers. So the whole behind closed doors thing doesn't really work here. We are way too close to launch to be holding back this footage. It's ridiculous, and I think if this footage was simply shown to everyone who watched Square's press conference, there would be far less questions being asked and a whole lot less confusion. Of course, it's 2019, and as you'd expect, the behind closed doors footage was quickly leaked via shaky, low-quality cell phone recording. Of course, I got my hands on the leaked footage and watched it again, and I realized something. I realized that underneath all of this poor marketing, looking beyond the horrible presentation at E3, the actual gameplay itself for Marvel's Avengers looks pretty damn good. And a lot of fun, and answers a bunch of questions I was left asking when I watched their official reveal. Why exactly was this gameplay demo hidden from the public? How could they think all of those cutscenes, talking heads on stages, and 2-minute discussion between voice actors did a better job selling this game than the gameplay itself? Featuring Hulk just smashing fools, Thor chucking his weapon and taking out dudes like Kratos, or Iron Man slicing through the air like a frickin' R-Wing from Star Fox. I'm gonna get more into the leaked gameplay footage in a couple of minutes, but a 3-minute polished version of this footage was literally all they needed if they wanted to generate a ton of buzz and positive word of mouth. Instead, I think they way overthought the situation, and unfortunately, the perception of the game and its overall buzz has suffered as a result. There is a really cool game here, but they completely botched the presentation. Coming out of E3, we ended up with more questions than answers, and when that happens, people get angry. And when people get angry, they create memes. Speaking of memes, there's one type of meme that has been around since the very beginning, and I don't think it'll go anywhere anytime soon. That meme is the Derp Face. The Derp Face will always endure, and it's for that very reason that game developers really need to nail their faces. Any game, even those part of a storied franchise, are only one Derp Face away from becoming the absolute laughingstock of the entire world. In this connected social media era, a viral image like this can sink a game's reputation in an instant, and it's damn near impossible to recover from that. Even Marvel itself has felt the consequences of a meme going viral. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite gave us some of the derpiest faces that I could ever remember seeing in a video game, and once those images really started to spread, that was that. The perception of the game was ruined, it was seen as an absolute joke, and it was basically dead on arrival. So I have to say, I was a little worried when we first got our look at each of the 5 Avengers at E3. For whatever reason, the faces in this game just look a bit off. It's certainly not easy to get perfect faces and facial movements in games, especially as we get closer and closer to photorealism. There is an uncanny valley effect that goes on in more realistic games compared to titles with more cartoony art styles, like say Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. However, I do think the pitch of this game is a AAA take on the Avengers, and with a AAA game, you'd expect them to kinda have this stuff figured out. Given all of the negative feedback coming out of E3, it's pretty clear that these faces aren't quite hitting the bar like, say, Red Dead Redemption 2. I definitely don't think it helps that the Avengers most of the world recognizes look like supermodels. It was always going to be an uphill battle representing these characters without the actors' likenesses from the movies. By the way, I don't think having the likenesses from the actors is at all necessary when it comes to translating these iconic characters into video game form. Again, I point to Spider-Man, which nailed the look of Peter Parker, Dr. Octopus, and Norman Osborn, none of which are based on any of the actors that portrayed them in the movies. So, like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite before it, the bizarre, somewhat derpy faces were shared like crazy and dominated the discussion coming out of the game's reveal at E3. These shots were emblematic of the game's presentation as a whole. Instead of speculating on what the game could offer or breaking down the actual facts and details provided at the show, most people just made memes about the faces, or talked about the faces, or laughed at the damn faces.
Why are they all distinctly not hot?
Yeah.
It's not that why is it Hulk hot? Why am I not horny for Captain America?
Bill Pixie.
The faces were the talking point, not the game itself, which obviously is a big issue. Now, I can't argue that these faces don't look bad. They look pretty freaking bad. But what I could argue is this. We are still relatively early in the development process here. Faces tend to be something that is changed towards the end of the AAA development cycle. We've actually seen this happen quite a few times recently with games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Injustice 2, and you guessed it, Spider-Man on the PS4. These things are tweaked and tweaked and tweaked as development continues and we get closer to launch. I find it extremely hard to believe that the absolute outcry regarding these faces is falling on deaf ears. I feel like fixing this whole situation is priority number one for that dev team. Maybe I'm naive, but I fully expect the faces to be fixed between now and launch day. If they somehow drop the ball on this, it's going to be meme central. It'll be Mass Effect Andromeda 2.0, and the game will die an ugly death. Marvel has to have some kind of quality control in place after the disaster that was Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. And coming off the success of Spider-Man, I don't think they'd want their biggest franchise associated with a failure of a video game. Recently, it seems like we've actually received some good news in the faces department. According to reports from San Diego Comic-Con, which took place just over a month after E3, the footage of the game that was shown seemed to be from an updated build. And with that updated build has come updated faces. Here's the image of Black Widow that has got a lot of people talking, comparing the E3 character model on the left to the San Diego Comic-Con model on the right. From this, it seems pretty clear to me that the team has heard the complaints about the faces loud and clear. The Comic-Con model definitely looks more detailed, defined, and expressive. I think it's safe to say that the character models will only look better and better as we get closer to launch. So now that we've talked a bit about the two major components of E3 that I think have caused all this negative word of mouth, you might be thinking, how the hell could someone be excited for this game? Well, believe it or not, it's pretty simple. I'm still hyped for Marvel's Avengers because the gameplay itself, the most important thing, looks dope. Unfortunately, the gameplay was explicitly not the focus of the marketing at E3, so this point has not really been getting across. When literally the biggest movies in the world are Marvel movies, your video game cutscenes aren't really impressing anyone. It's really impossible to live up to the standard the 11-year, 23-film MCU has set from a narrative perspective, much less with only your first Avengers game. It's the gameplay and interactive elements of the game that will make or break Marvel's Avengers, not the story and certainly not the cutscenes. Unfortunately, the only real way to get a grasp of the game's actual gameplay is through the leaked Potato Cam video. Luckily, it's pretty easy to find on YouTube if you just search Avengers leaked gameplay, and the official Avengers Twitter has confirmed that this gameplay video will be released in an official capacity at the end of August 2019 after Gamescom. But for now, all we got is the leaked footage, which is basically just an unedited version of the seconds worth of gameplay we see in the official trailer. All of this leaked gameplay comes from probably the first 15 minutes or so of the game. As seen in the trailer and explained by the writers, Taskmaster shows up one day to steal some special helicarrier tech. He's successful, and this causes the helicarrier to fall into the water and blow up, killing millions of people as a result. At that point, the Avengers disassemble, and the game's story and drama really kicks off. This gameplay all takes place just before the helicarrier is destroyed. One of the common complaints I've seen is that the game looked super easy and the enemy AI is poor. I'm hoping the explanation behind that is that this is simply early on in the game, and this entire bridge sequence works as a tutorial for each of the 5 core Avengers. At the same time, remember that these are superheroes. Thor is a god. With the combat in Spider-Man and the Arkham games, you feel like Spider-Man and Batman. And what comes with that is often pretty weak AI, where you could just kinda beat the living shit out of them and it's just satisfying as hell. If you're expecting Dark Souls or Castlevania-like difficulty, I'm not sure you're gonna find that here with this game or really any superhero game. This game is going to act as a power fantasy, and most of the fun is probably going to come from how satisfying the characters are to control, and less the resistance put up by the enemies, especially random grunts. Random grunts in Spider-Man were pretty easy to beat on too, but eventually more and more complex enemies were introduced, and I fully expect the same thing here in Avengers. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it would have done them wonders to just show some gameplay from later on in the game with more interesting enemies, so that they could at least tease some more complex combat. But hey, on the bright side, I just finished Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, and most of that game is just beating down on hordes of random enemies as a team of 4 Avengers, and I can assure you, that shit is fun as hell. Which leads me to my next point. This shit looks fun as hell. The leaked gameplay footage begins following Thor in an area just near the bridge, and this is where we get our first good look at Thor's combat. And honestly, it looks exactly how I expected it to look after we found out that Vince Napoli, the lead combat designer for God of War, was going to be working on this game. Thor throws and recalls his hammer much like Kratos does with his weapon in God of War, and that was literally all I wanted. The sound effects when that thing comes into contact with an enemy also sound super meaty, and I love it.
I just caught a bus. You should have had a bigger breakfast this morning.
I also love how the regular human enemies just go flying into the distance when Thor hits them, exactly as you'd expect from tiny humans trying to step up to a literal god. Thor looks awesome, I have no issue with the way he seems to control, and I look forward to chucking that hammer at a ton of dudes for hours and hours to come. Next up, we transition to Iron Man, who displays 2 separate styles of gameplay. First is an aerial chase of sorts that appears to be on rails. You weave through obstacles, shoot enemies up ahead, and can do barrel rolls to dodge oncoming attacks. This reminded me a lot of Star Fox, and I would have never thought of this, but I actually think it suits Iron Man pretty well as a gameplay style. This little sequence was pretty slow, but as the game goes on and the stakes pick up, I could easily imagine some pretty fast-paced aerial sequences that would force the player to push Iron Man's aerial mobility to the limits. There's definitely a lot of potential with this gameplay style. We then see Iron Man's regular gameplay, and it's pretty much what you'd expect. Much like his moveset in the Marvel Ultimate Alliance games, he could attack while grounded with standard moves, or hover a decent bit off the ground and attack from the air. A lot of his game is projectile based, and he's seen shooting plenty of energy blasts from his wrists. There's like a charge shot multi-hit attack, and of course, the Unibeam. No video game Iron Man is complete without the Unibeam. While not quite as satisfying as Thor's gameplay, I'm still excited to get my hands on Iron Man, and I think there's a ton of potential here with this character's moveset, most of which I think will be realized when he has to go up against more interesting enemies later in the game. Next up is the Incredible Hulk, and the first thing he does is grab a dude and proceed to beat the shit out of another dude with the first dude. Just perfect. A lot of Hulk's gameplay seems to center around grabbing stuff, either debris or enemies themselves, and then proceeding to smash them. Another central gameplay mechanic for Hulk is wall jumping, which was a surprise. I guess it makes sense since in the original Avengers movie, we frequently saw Hulk kinda jumping into buildings and push off them, creating a pseudo wall jump, but it wasn't something I expected to see in this game. I'm pleasantly surprised though, and I think some 3D platforming could definitely add some nice variety overall to the game. We then gain control of Captain America, who is currently on the helicarrier as this is all going down. If anyone in this game controls like a Dark Souls character, it might be Steve Rogers, because this gameplay featured a lot of shielding and a lot of rolling. Cap's main methods of attack include meleeing someone with his shield or throwing the shield, moves you'd probably expect if you've ever played as Cap in a game before. Nothing crazy here, certainly nothing as satisfying as Thor or Hulk's combat, but then again, Cap has never been as flashy as the other Avengers. His playstyle is simple and gets the job done. At this point, we transition back to the bridge, and we get our first look at a young Kamala Khan trying to escape from all the chaos. I suspect she will be playable soon after the in-game time skip takes place. Taskmaster shows up, and it's time for Black Widow to take center stage, basically giving us a little preview of her upcoming solo movie. I was really interested to see just how Black Widow was going to move in this game, given that she is definitely the least powerful of the 5 Avengers currently playable, and is really just a normal human who is highly skilled in combat. She seems to have a much faster ground speed than any of the other Avengers, and like Hulk, her section here involves some 3D platforming, and I do expect we'll see more of that for her later in the game, as she's always been portrayed as a very acrobatic character. Next, we get a QTE sequence where Natasha is just punching the crap out of Taskmaster as he just flies around. Now, I don't like QTEs very much, I just don't think they're fun, but unfortunately at this point they kinda are a staple in third-person action games, especially in superhero games. I can only hope they don't dominate the gameplay too much and are only used intermittently throughout the game. Once the QTE ends, it's just Black Widow versus Taskmaster, and we get our first good look at Widow's standard playstyle. Her primary means of attack are 2 handguns, and like Cap, she does a lot of rolling as well. When Taskmaster becomes grounded, we see some of Natasha's close quarters combat, which is your basic super cool punches, kicks, and flip kicks. She definitely reminds me a lot of Cap. Nothing really flashy here, just the tried and true, and her speed seems to be the main thing that sets her apart from the other Avengers. Towards the end of the fight, Black Widow activates a cloaking device that makes her completely invisible. I'm not sure if this is a one-time trick only used in this boss battle, or if it's one of her special abilities that she could use on command. I'm kinda hoping it's the latter because that would definitely give her something totally special and unique, and I think that would just make her more interesting to play overall. After the Taskmaster fight, the helicarrier explodes and the gameplay demo ends. In case it wasn't obvious, I was really impressed by this gameplay footage, and even with only minutes of footage for each character, I already see a ton of potential for this game. When it comes to basic combat for these 5 Avengers, it's pretty much exactly like I imagined it in my head. It reminds me a lot of the recently released Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, just with a realistic art style and far more detailed animation and cinematics overall. Ever since this game was originally announced, I always just kind of envisioned a Marvel Ultimate Alliance-like experience with the modern day AAA treatment, and that's kinda all I really wanted. Now the question is whether they simply meet my expectations, or manage to go above and beyond, providing a top-tier superhero game experience that constantly surprises me and exceeds expectations, like Spider-Man on PS4 or the Arkham games. From what we've seen so far, I think the potential is absolutely there, though obviously it's way too early to say for sure. Ultimately, the most important thing about any superhero game to me is whether or not the devs nail the feel of the character. When I play Spider-Man on PS4, I feel like Spider-Man, I swing like Spider-Man, and I fight like Spider-Man. Similarly, the Batman Arkham games really make you feel like Batman. Here in Marvel's Avengers, Hulk smashes fools as if each and every one of them were Loki, Iron Man shoots gigantic energy beams and slices through the air with finesse, and Thor sends his enemies flying into the distance with his magic hammer. As far as feel is concerned, I have some very good vibes after watching only 15 minutes or so of gameplay. Going forward, I can only hope Square realizes their marketing blunders from E3 and chooses to focus on the gameplay itself as we head closer to the game's May 2020 launch. At the moment, I think they are well on the way to putting out a game worthy of the Avengers name. And that's gonna wrap it up for today. As mentioned earlier, we should get some new information on Marvel's Avengers out of Gamescom, which takes place from August 20th to 24th. As well, the official A-Day gameplay video will be released the week after Gamescom, so that's definitely something to look forward to. Beyond Gamescom, there's probably a good chance we see more of the game at New York Comic Con in October, and perhaps at the Game Awards this December as well. I definitely plan to keep tabs on Marvel's Avengers from now until launch, so if you want to see more videos like this one, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Hopefully by the next time we see the game, those faces will all be fixed. Anyways, that's all for today, so until next time, thanks so much for watching everyone, and take care.